Pedro from A&P-Reacts. I'm here today with Aaron of Wolves in the Throne Room to talk about Primordial Arcana that's out right now for everybody to enjoy. How are you doing today?
It's a great day, Pedro. This is a nice time in the flow of being in a rock band after working for a number of years, writing, recording, going through the ordeal of mixing and mastering, through all of the label stuff and the production and the headaches and the things that go perfectly and the things that don't go so perfectly, to be in this space. And that week after the record comes out and we're starting to get reviews back in, we're able to relax a little bit, know that our work is done. And now it's just a matter of people listening to the music and connecting with it in whatever way feels right for them.
I was just going to ask you, now that the anticipation for the release is over, because now the album is out there, people can start enjoying it, they can listen to it, they can give you some feedback on how they feel about the record. Does this start a different level of stress for you versus the stress that leads up to the actual release?
No, not at all. None of it's really, the only thing that's stressful is getting LPs pressed, meeting deadlines and getting LPs pressed. Because as you might know, there's all these delays with manufacturing nowadays for a number of reasons. And meeting deadlines is stressful. You know, during the course of recording this record, I had a number of all-nighters, just working all night to get the final touches on the mix or just get the final guitar part down before we had to send it off to the next person down the line. But at this point, no, it's a no stress situation at all. Once we release a record, it's done. It is completely out there in the world. I probably won't even listen to it again, tell you the truth. I'm thinking about the next thing. I'm thinking about getting back on the road, getting the tour together, the live lineup, how we're going to play the songs live, and thinking about more recording as well.
So getting a little bit back into this record, into the mindset that you had when you were putting this album together, how much did you take from the previous albums, from your learning experiences, putting those records together, and moved over to this one because you felt like this one could really learn a little bit from all the mistakes of the past and all the things that you did right?
Good question. A bit of both. We always carry a lot forward. The way that we actually write the material in terms of just the riffs, we've stayed pretty consistent with that way of working for the past 2 or 3 records since Celestial Lineage. The way we do it is we focus on just the riffs. We don't practice in a jam room with the drums, all of us rocking it out. All 3 of us write the songs on guitar, just the pure guitar riff, no synthesizers, no vocals, no lyrics, no production concepts, no synthesizers. Because we want to make sure the songs work on their own just as guitar parts, you know, just as pure melody and harmony. That's just the essence of what we do. It comes from our love of Metallica. It's just about the riff, you know, it's about the guitar playing and the intensity and the power that you can find in a good riff. Of course, there was a lot different about the way we worked on this record, primarily because this, as you might know, is the first record that we recorded entirely on our own at our own Owl Lodge studios in Olympia, without the aid of any outside engineers or producers. So for this album, I was the one in the hot seat, so to speak, moving the faders, and did the mixing on the record as well. So my experience of recording was extremely different, because instead of just being able to sit back on the couch and let the producer steer the ship to a certain degree or solve some of the technical or artistic problems that come up along the way, it fell to me to figure a lot of that stuff out. But it's a challenge that I relish and enjoyed the process a great deal.
Did this album offer you some, outside of that new challenge of you being a little bit more in control, was there any other thing that came at you that was perhaps a little bit unexpected?
The whole thing is so unexpected. You know, the going on a record is like, or starting to write a record is like jumping off a cliff. It really is, because as an artist, I open myself up to the unknown in myself. Like once I start to delve in to my own heart, my own soul, to bring forth the inspiration and the music itself, what will I find in there? What will it stir up in my own life and my own psyche? It's always a bit mysterious. And sometimes the things that are discovered on that inner journey are very painful and difficult to deal with. But that's the role of the music. That's the alchemy, the pain that we discover inside ourselves or that we feel in the world. That's the prima materia. That's the energy source for the music.
At what point in the creative process do you start thinking about how are these songs going to coexist with one another in the overall concept of the record? Is that later down the road, or does it start really early for you?
It's quite early, actually. That's a good question. We do come from the old school where we don't make singles for Spotify, we make albums that are meant to be listened to from beginning to end. And so indeed, we do think about where a song is going to go on the record and what its particular role will be in the overall journey and story of the finished product. I always think that I'd say on most really great albums, especially our records, if you just listen to one song in the middle of the record, it's like opening a book to some random chapter, reading it. It might be beautiful words, it might be interesting, but you're not getting the full story, of course.
It doesn't paint the picture. You know what I mean? It's like you're almost getting something out of the context in which it exists. So it while you may connect with it, it really is not telling you everything that you need to learn about what that song represents when you look at the album as a whole.
Yeah, that's the way we do it. Artists, especially nowadays, might look at things differently, but we're going to stay true to the old way of doing things.
Do you look for inspirations for different parts of the record in different places, either within yourself or outside of yourself, or does everything kind of come from that same chest?
Good question. No, it's different. For us, the inspiration is the wild nature. It's the mountains, it's the rivers of Cascadia. And so every song has it's a world in my mind. The music for me is very visual. So when I close my eyes and listen to one of our songs, I picture the place that inspired it. It might be the top of a mountain. It might be at the saltwater by our studio. It might be one particular tree. It might be one particular flower. It might be something very small and humble. But yeah, no, those things are woven into the songs in a very intimate way.
And speaking of weaving, when I listen to you guys, it's specifically with this record, when I listen to this album, it's very hard for me to break away the soundscape and the atmosphere. The two are kind of like intertwined. Sometimes you get more of one, perhaps a little bit more of the other. How do you manage to weave these two different elements so perfect that they become really one?
Yeah, that's the heart of what we do. It's atmospheric music. It's music that opens up a world that the listener can move into. And for that reason, we want to create a cohesive universe. We don't necessarily want to be able to pick out the individual pieces, the atoms. We want it to be something that it's like the ocean that you can become immersed in, become lost in. And it takes, that's the art. That's the work that we do, is to take 100 tracks, which we oftentimes have 100 tracks easily on some of our songs, and putting them together, weaving them together in a way that creates this infinite void that we can move within as a listener, or as for ourselves as artists.
On this album, you definitely have that atmospheric black metal as the spinal cord of the record, as the main DNA. At least that's my feeling when I listen to it. But then you start to feel like there's these other influences coming in, like more melodic black metal, death metal, and they're all coming in with their own different aromas, if you will, with their own different styles, with their own different flavors. What did you feel like you could get out of those genres that would complement the sound on this record, or that would allow you to achieve that ultimate goal that you had in mind for how this album needed to sound?
Good question. Yeah, we definitely did draw from some different genre genres for inspiration. A lot of it is music that we grew up with, music that we first encountered as teenagers and is just woven into our heavy metal DNA. It's just who we are. The death metal influence, definitely strong. I really felt that in the drums. My archetypal drum sound is the Morrisound drum sound. Altars of Madness, Covenant. I mean, all of those records that were recorded in that era in the Florida death metal scene, that was the first extreme metal that I got into as a young teenager. And so that drum sound is imprinted in my mind. The kick drum on this record, I tried to mix like Pete Commando Sandoval's kick on Covenant. And as far as the symphonic elements, we knew we wanted to come with a lot of epic synthesizers. For us, the archetypal record is Anthems of the Welkin at Dusk, I would say, in terms of this grand, very magical and mysterious atmosphere that can be conjured with the interplay between guitar and synth. Of course, we do our own thing. We have our own methods, but that's a feeling that I value a lot and have a lot of respect for.
You mentioned the drum, so I want to go there next. I really like the drum sound on this record. I felt like at times was a little bit earthy, but not overly earthy. It had a little bit more of a punch, if you will. Was that a direction that you wanted to go for this specific record, to pull away more from perhaps a more earthy sound of previous albums?
Yeah, we wanted to be colder. I mean, that was the descriptor that we used in the studio. The last record was very earthy, very warm, very low down to the ground. This record, we wanted to be like cold ice on the mountain. In fact, when we were first just starting to develop the concepts for Primordial Arcana, the very first riffs, the very first ideas, the image that came to all of us was when you're high up in the mountains at the edge of the glaciers, you know, this is where the streams are coming from. That's the mother of rivers. And to drink the water that's coming right off the glacier, ice cold, completely pure. When you drink that water, it's like getting struck by lightning almost. It's like this effervescent fluid, just full of vitality, almost like blue electricity. And so that was the feeling that we wanted to weave through the whole record, this feeling of coldness and of this power that you feel in the high places in the mountains.
It definitely comes across listening to the album. I mean, being from Canada, we're familiar with cold weather. So when I was listening to this album, I felt like one of those days when you open the door and that breeze comes in. It looks beautiful outside. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of deceiving because you look outside and it's beautiful. But when you walk out, you get faced with this cold breeze that almost makes you feel alive. And I felt that listening to this album, there's so much beauty in the record, but at the same time, it feels so cold, so desolate.
Yeah, that's the balance. You know, that's the yin and the yang of the music. And I'm glad that you feel that way, because that's certainly what we intended as the artists.
Some albums, when you listen to it, you could feel like there's one element that drives the experience, either it be the drums, the vocals, the guitars. When you look back now at this record, is there one element that outshines, or maybe not out, maybe that's not the right word, but is there one element that's kind of the igniter, the motor behind this whole record, or everything moves together as one?
It really is one thing. I've always tried to, my favorite records, the mix on my favorite records, it's when everything becomes one. And so you can both pick out individual instruments. You're like, oh, there's the ride cymbal, there's the kick drum, there's one particular layer of the guitar. But at the same time, you can also perceive it as one thing. And so no one element is any more important than the other, but also it's important to me that each element is distinguishable as an individual entity. And finding the balance between the two, that's the work of mixing. And it's so delicate. It's crazy how once you get a mix going, it really almost magically coalesces. And if you move one thing, it can throw it completely into disaster. It's a challenging balancing act. The thing that I learned from Randall Dunn, who is the producer that we worked with on the majority of our previous albums, is that the real art of producing and mixing is to make sure that your consciousness stays in your heart. and that you're feeling the music at all times. Because if you start thinking too hard about, oh, is this too loud? Is this too quiet? Is this part good? Is this part bad? You know, the judgmental mind, the monkey mind, you won't be able to make any good artistic decisions. But if you're able to always feel the music, how does this feel? Does this bass drum feel right to me? What would make it feel better? That's the way forward. And I think that's the magic of music, is it's a way to transmit our hearts, the feeling in our hearts, to the listener. It's not about ideas. It's not about philosophies or concepts. It's a feeling that we get. And that's why we all love heavy metal so much.
When you talked about your creative process, you said that everything starts with the guitars. You leave everything else outside. The riffs is where everything starts. So when you have the end product that's really not driven by one element, but rather by how everything comes together, how hard it is for you to find that balance once you're starting off just so heavy on one side of the spectrum?
That's not much of a challenge, actually, because we know that the melodies and the harmonies, the riffs, are the heart of the song. It's the root, and everything else in the mix serves to support that. We're just really into songwriting. We're just really into the craft of songwriting, and for that reason, we do whatever it takes to serve the song. And for us, the song is the melody and the harmony. It's the riff. That's the thing that you could just play on an acoustic guitar and say, oh, that's that song.
Where do the vocals come in that big picture, in that final format? Are they just another element? Do you see perhaps a little bit of being more of a narrator to a story than anything else?
Yeah, the vocals play an interesting role. On one hand, they're ambience. They're part of the atmosphere. That's just part of the genre of black metal that we work within. It is the human voice on the record. It's the voice of the narrator, as you put it, the human being who is experiencing these things, perceiving these things. And the lyrics, in my case, we all have our different methods of writing lyrics, but I write the lyrics last, the lyrics that I contribute to the records. When the record is nearly mixed, I'll put on headphones, listen to it, and visualize the landscape that emerges in my mind's eye as I listen to the music and write down what I see. And so the lyrics that I contribute are literally just what I saw in my mind as I listened to my song from as a listener for the first time. It's my first moment in the recording process where I step back a bit from the just being purely in it, step back a bit to observe it with a little bit of distance. And that's where the lyrics come from for me. But we all, Nathan and Cody, have their own processes, occult processes I don't fully understand.
You have a very well mapped out way of attacking a record in terms of what your vision is, how you want to start it, and what you want your end goal to be. And you mentioned it earlier that you build the record to be a record, not just to be singles, which is how I enjoy albums myself. So then how difficult it is for you when you start to plan on going on the road, on touring, and taking that album with you in terms of mixing the set list so that there's a sense of continuity, there's a sense of balance in that format as well.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's something we have a lot of experience with. Putting together a good set list is much like sequencing an album, because for us, the live concert is very much a journey that we are on with the audience, and we construct the set list in that way to open the space to travel through various realms and then reach the climax, whatever that might be. It's a very different mind space, obviously. I've always noticed behind the scenes that every musician I know has two very different, it's almost like having to have two different personalities, the studio personality and the live personality, because there's such different ways of working with the same materials, the same songs, it's the same band, but two very different perspectives on the art. And we've been in the studio mindset for a long time. It's almost like being in a monastery, you know, it's just all dudes doing the same thing every day. And there's a spirituality that's woven into it. and a quietness and a meditative quality. And very shortly, we will switch gears. Now the record's out, we're starting to really get our gears turning about moving on to the road, which of course is a bit of a challenge now in this time, but I'm hopeful that it's going to happen. We're chomping at the bit to get back out and share this music with our fans. That's the live concert is a source of nourishment that we really depend on to sustain us as musicians.
Last question for you. And you mentioned right at the beginning of the conversation that now that the record is behind you, it's out of your hands anymore. It's out there, and you perhaps won't listen to it for a long time. But as you perhaps look back at the whole process, at the finished product, what was the most gratifying aspect of making this album?
For me, it was getting the mix right, because I had not planned on mixing this record. It was a job that was thrust upon me by circumstance because we tracked the record. We're very happy with the way it sounded, sent it out to get it mixed, which is a common way to work nowadays. And it just didn't work out. The mixes that we got back from an excellent mix engineer, it was as if he had just wrung all of the magic out of it. All of the feeling, all of that heart feeling that I talked about earlier was gone. And we realized, oh shit, I mean, no one is going to be able to mix this record because we are so deep in it. We understand exactly what we want to get across. I have to do it. So that was a challenge. It wasn't stressful necessarily, but it was like setting out on a very hard journey into the mountains that will be very painful, but at the same time, you can do it. And so when I finally got the first mix of Mountain Magic to come together, that was a good feeling. Like, this sounds good. When I compared Mountain Magic to some of our previous records and some of my reference tracks, and it stood right up against the records that I was emulating or inspired by, that was a feeling of triumph that I relish.
Well, you guys really did it. So that was the right decision to go with your gut, once again, to go with what feels right, because the end result speaks for themselves. I mean, this is a outstanding record by, I mean, doesn't matter how I look at it, and doesn't matter what element I look at, this is just a phenomenal album that you really have to take the time to sit down and enjoy the journey that takes you on. And it's one of those journeys that you never want it to end. You just want it to continue to stay in that pocket. So I love this record.
Nice, man. Thank you. I really appreciate that praise. It means a lot to me.
Well, thank you for your time today. This was an absolute blast. I really had a great time talking to you. Such an interesting mind. I feel like if we sat here for longer and I dive deeper, I'm not only going to get lost in your music, I'm going to get lost in your mind. So that's where the magic happens. So it makes it really interesting to find out a little bit more about the album and about the band and how you work and how your mind operates. So I appreciate you taking the time today to chat with me about it.
Oh man, it's a great pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.